Because we started off this little excursion in the desert. Have you been to the desert? Uh-huh. It's in Oklahoma. And it lies far away in the land of perfect. It's far, far away from the land of perfect. See, the land of perfect is nowhere near the desert. But so many wonderful and important things happened in the desert that we need to spend a little time learning about what it was like in the desert. Because if we feel that we haven't visited the desert yet, well, one day we will. We will. And you see, as I was saying earlier in that story, the desert is a dangerous place. There is little water. Almost nothing grows there, so there's hardly anything to eat. No substance, no sustenance. And in order to make it out alive, you have to rely on your community, on the kindness of strangers, and on the grace of God. In the daytime, in the desert, it is hot, and in the night, it is bitter, bitter cold. And when the wind blows, it is not refreshing because the sand stings your skin. See, the desert is a dangerous, dangerous place. And people do not go into the desert unless they have to. Some have been exiled into the desert, put there by someone else, something else. And some are wandering in the desert free, but still carrying heavy burdens. See, the shape of the desert is constantly changing, and the tracks of where we have been are easily blown away. People get lost. Have you been there? All right, church, you got to stay with me because I'm going there today. Have you been to the desert? All right. It's true that for a time our ancestors, our religious ancestors, believed that God only lived in a temple, and that a high wall would protect us from just about anything. But we know differently now, don't we? You see, even though sometimes it's difficult to act on these beliefs of knowing differently, we know still that God does not solely reside in the temple of one specific group of people. Nor does God exist alone in one church. We know that we can experience God just about anywhere. That our spirits can be lifted when we open our hearts to receive. Even in the desert. Even in the desert. And though it is difficult sometimes to act on this knowledge, we also know differently from our ancestors that building walls around ourselves will protect us from nothing. There's another ancient story that I believe is important for us to know as religious people. It speaks to this ancient idea that still goes on today, that we can wall out danger, that we can wall out brokenness, that with a thick enough wall and just the right resources, we can protect ourselves from just about anything. The ancient story is about Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha, central figure in Buddhism. You see, when the Buddha was born, it was predicted by many that he would either become a great king or a great holy man. And Siddhartha's father was a little partial to one result. See, he wanted his child to become a great king. And so in preferring him to become a great king, his father shielded him from all religious teachings and from any knowledge of suffering. He kept the Buddha within the confines of the palace walls. And some ancient accounts even say that when Siddhartha traveled within the giant palace, servants would go ahead of him on his path, sweeping up all of the dirt, clearing out the sick, making sure that Siddhartha saw no aged, no physically or mentally afflicted, no poverty, no dirt, no shame. As you can imagine, it took a lot of time and energy and resources to keep this up. A whole lot of time and energy and resources. But Siddhartha also had his every desire fulfilled. And one day, They could not keep up this illusion. And Siddhartha saw within the palace walls his first elderly person. And when the Buddha asked his servant, he said, "What is this?" The servant explained to him that everyone, in fact, grows old, even Siddhartha's protective father. Even the Buddha himself would grow old. Siddhartha became more and more curious about what he did not know after this experience, and at age 29, Siddhartha is said to have ventured outside the palace walls, where he first witnessed poverty, disease, and death. And it was only after he was able to see the world as it is, only after he was able to see suffering, that he pursued and eventually found enlightenment. And so from this ancient story, we can take away, even with unlimited resources of time and energy spent creating an illusion of perfection around us, illusions are always temporary, and the truth is inevitable. I've been reading a lot of Dr. Brene Brown lately. She's a therapist and a researcher who writes on shame and perfectionism and vulnerability. She has a TED video, if you watch those, so you can go look her up. But one thing that Dr. Brown makes very clear from her research is that the walls we erect to create an illusion of perfection, an illusion that nothing is wrong, that we are invulnerable, that we're in control, this wall does not protect us from suffering at all, our own or someone else's. If you fooled yourself into using these walls as protection, if you fooled yourself into believing, like the ancients, that the walls will protect you from everything, that what you will actually wall out will not only be your pain and your shame, what you may not know is that what you are also walling out is your joy. Because numb is numb, is numb, is numb. We cannot selectively numb ourselves. And happiness and joy, just like we saw right there on this chancel today, happiness and joy require as much vulnerability as suffering and pain. So whether we stay in the city, walled off in the palace from the world, or whether we venture off into the desert, our culture is trying to sell us an illusion of perfection. Just try and find an image of yourself reflected back in a magazine. Because there is no human being in a magazine. That is a photoshopped illusion. Real life was photoshopped out. So our culture is trying to sell us this illusion of perfection, and it mirrors for us this standard that no one can achieve. A standard that separates from us from each other instead of helping us to connect. That keeps us in shame. Because in order to fit in, given these images, given these ideas of perfection, we have to minimize our own vulnerability. In order to be cool, we have to always be in control. And weakness is to be avoided at all costs. It's a mixed message, really, if you think about it. Fit in, but stand out. Right? Be like everyone else, but be better. Dr. Brown writes, perfectionism is not the same thing as striving to be your best. Perfectionism is not about healthy achievement and growth. Perfectionism is the belief that if we live perfect and look perfect and act perfect, we can minimize or avoid the pain of blame, judgment, and shame. When we are constantly comparing ourselves to an unachievable standard, a moving target of perfection that requires us to be tough and in control rather than vulnerable and strong. When we are constantly comparing ourselves to one another and to this unachievable standard, it creates an us and a them. So when we really are in pain and need help from one another, we hide ourselves far from perfect. We hide ourselves far from perfect in shame. Dr. Brown writes, there are people like us, and then there are those other people. And we work very, very hard to insulate ourselves from those other people. You know what I'm talking about, church? As children, there are those people that we were allowed to hang out with and those that were not. There were the people we were allowed to date, and then there were those people that we were not allowed to date. There were the schools that we went to, and there were the other schools for the other kids. And as adults, we live in neighborhoods where our kind live, and the other neighborhoods are for those other folks. There's our church, and then there's that other church. See, we emotionally and physically insulate ourselves from the other. And it never seems to end. We've even developed a language to describe the others. Sometimes we refer to them as those people, or even the more mysterious, this will be hidden in language. You'll hear this after this Sunday. People like that. Anytime everyone says people like that to you, say like what? People like what? People like that. Well, church, I'm here to tell you this morning that something that might be a little revolutionary. You might already know it. But we are those people. We are those people. See, most of us are one paycheck, one divorce, one drug-addicted kid, one mental health diagnosis, one serious illness, one sexual assault, one drinking binge, one night of unprotected sex, one affair away from being one of those people. Do you see what I'm saying? One. Those people that we don't trust, those people that we pity, the ones we don't let our children play with, the ones that bad things happen to, the ones we don't want living next door. No, not her. The broken, the vulnerable, the imperfect. I heard somebody say that they were in the line, the drop-off line at the school. You know what I'm talking about. If you take your kids to school, you got to wait in this long line to dump your kid off at the school. And there was a long wait because somebody in the front had passed out drunk at the front of the line, dropping off their kid at school. And everybody got out of the car, all the moms. I'm sorry, it's moms, I'm sorry, but it was primarily moms. Got out of the car, started talking, and what happened? Oh, whisper, whisper, whisper. Did they think, I wonder who's going to pick up little Mary from school today? No, they thought, oh, poor Mary's mama, drunk, passed out. I'm not going to let my daughter go play with her anymore. It's very interesting. Now, maybe I'm completely wrong, but I don't think so. See, I think it's time for us to completely come out of the closet with our brokenness, to leave the palace walls and to come out into the desert for just a minute. Now, I know it's a dangerous place. I've said that today. But important things happen in the desert. So what I'm going to invite you to do this morning is to come out in your brokenness and share all of your experiences of brokenness that we will refuse to let define us. Refuse to let experiences that happen to us define us. So if you're willing, I'd love for you to raise your hands. You know, I did this in the first service and they participated. I'm telling you. If you are willing, I would love for you to raise your hands. Now, you can raise it one time or you can just leave it up. Some of y'all are going to leave them up. That's all right. If you or any member of your family, so this isn't about looking around and going, ooh, I knew she was a whatever. This is about owning the fact that you or someone in your family have some of these imperfect issues that touch your life. Issues that would label you as those people. You know who I'm talking about? So here we go. Ready? Addiction. Alcohol, drug, food, sex, relationships, any addiction. Look around, find your people. Y'all can find each other after the service. Any mental health diagnosis, depression, anxiety, eating disorders, bipolar, attention deficit, etc. Just, yeah, those AA people are going to hold you accountable now. 2 hands up. You're going to run out of hands. Any stigmatized illness, cancer, sexually transmitted diseases, obesity, AIDS, HIV, domestic violence, sexual assault. Look around. child abuse, physical, sexual, neglect, emotional, suicide, violent death, criminal activity, or incarceration. But I want you to look at this one. No, it's important. I want you to see this, that the people whose hands are up are not all of one color, right? They are not all of one color. Incarceration affects many more than the face that we put on the news. Abortion or miscarriage. We don't talk about that. Poverty, including class issues. Bankruptcy. Low educational attainment, lacking basic literary skills, dropout rates, etc. You got a kid that dropped out of school. Divorce. Boy, there's a lot of hands. There we go. I'm so proud of all of you. Helping to destroy this illusion of perfect lives. There is no perfect life. And if you didn't raise your hand, hold on a minute, I got one more. So don't just sit still. This is the bar for your new normal. What you just saw today. There is no normal. This is your new normal. Everybody hurts. Everybody. We are those people. Those people are us having difficult experiences. And just in case I hadn't gotten everybody, let me just add that Dr. Brown includes something on her list that you might not expect. See, on her list of experiences of defining folks as other, she likes to include non-mainstream religious beliefs. There you go. I mean you Unitarian, you Universalist, you agnostic, atheist, Buddhist. Don't describe me as anything person. There is no other. We are those people. It is us. And I think Dr. Brown was just being nice, you see, because we hold people as other and being broken in all kinds of ways, and then we use it to shame them or shame ourselves. What about the categories of dumb and smart? Let me tell you something. Nobody is dumb or smart. People make dumb choices, and they might be smart occasionally. Maybe more often than not. But everybody's done dumb and smart things in their lives. So refuse the shame. If you can take your language, this is all language, right? Take the language and twist it around. Somebody came through the line afterwards and said, "You are so good." I said, "No, that sermon was good. I wrote a good sermon." Right? This has nothing to do with my value. If I bomb up here today, I am still loved by God. I still love myself, no matter how much you hate or don't like my sermon. So refuse the shame. Refuse to be defined. The other one, my favorite, what's beautiful? Skin color, hair texture, fat, skinny. This is defining people by their body type. For real? Refuse the shame. Rich or poor people, let me tell you, money is fluid, so don't be banking on that. And people are not the value of their bank accounts. Gay or straight people, really? We're going to judge people by who they love? Really? Young and old people, I tell you, this one bothers me the most. Young and old people. We have all been young, and let me tell you something. If we're lucky, we're all going to be old. If we are lucky, we will all be old. If you see somebody old, you say, "You are lucky." Look how lucky they are. Because see, we are those people. And we are far, far from perfect. But we live in a culture of shame that encourages perfectionism, because you see, in our culture, there's no assumed inherent worth or value. In our culture, we are our successes or failures, or we become our successes or failures, creating this us and them, this in and out. Now let's not be confused here. There's still a need for a right and wrong. I'm not throwing out everything, because there needs to be right and wrong and accountability. I would even say there's room for guilt. So let's make a distinction. The distinction between guilt and shame. See, guilt is very important to me, but the difference between guilt and shame is even more important to me as a religious person, because there are people out there speaking as though they are speaking the word of God who say that some people are bad, are born bad, and I will not stand in this pulpit and not speak against that whenever I can. But Dr. Brown says that guilt is when you do something bad, and shame is when you simply are bad. So having some healthy guilt, that's okay. But in Dr. Brown's research, she discovered that there is a correlation between people who use shame language, I am bad, and people who are addicted, depressed, bullying. There's a correlation between shame and eating disorders. There's a correlation between shame and suicide, between shame and violence, between shame and crime, but not guilt. Guilt shows up inversely correlative with those things. So when we can distinguish between being bad and making a bad choice or behaving badly, we can reduce the likelihood of addiction and depression and violence. Where are people learning all this? The study she did said that kids have a preference of either shame or guilt language by the time that they are in the 5th grade. 5th grade. But I'm not going to blame your parents. It's parents and it's culture. It's the church. It's school. There's a lot of pressure coming around. It's not any one source. But what she wants to make sure that we understand is that guilt is not comfortable. Guilt is uncomfortable, but it is a behavior that adapts us. You see, when you've done something wrong and you're guilty about it, you can make amends and move through and be resilient. But when shame has a hold of you, when shame has a hold of your mistakes and you become your mistakes and begin to believe that you are a bad person, your identity is all wrapped up in your failures. And then the phone rings. And it's God. And God said, you're good all the time, all the time. Right. All right. No, they say you've got to know yourself, right? Know yourself. And I want you to know yourself. But what's more important to me is love thyself. Love thyself is even more important because if you know yourself and you're still speaking shame language, it's a mess. It's a mess, a filthy mess. So how do we do that? How do we move? If we've already got some shame language going on, how do we move? Well, I think that we have to surrender to our own fallibility. We have to speak that shame out of existence. We have to speak that guilt out loud and not hide far from perfect. We are imperfect creatures, and when we have the opportunity to speak up about it, speak up about it. We need to surrender to the fact that we are worthy and valuable no matter what our actions are. Now let me translate some of this for you God-fearing people. God-loving people. I don't like God-fearing. God-loving people. How do you fix this if the God language doesn't bother you? You fix this by giving yourself to an unconditional love of a loving God. You give yourself over to the unconditional love of a loving God. That's simple, right? No, we have to do it all the time. All the time. Which is why we have all these songs that remind us over and over and over again that God is good and we are okay. Now, knowing that we're fallible and that we are enough because we were born, because see, we were born humans, not gods, and so we're going to mess up. Knowing that we are children of God who make mistakes, not sinners, each and every one. And that distinction, like I said, is so important to me because we are children of God who sin, who miss the mark, who are fallible. We are not sinners. We cannot be defined by a single experience in our life, by a single act, no matter how good or how bad we perceive that act to be. So stand up to that shame. When someone shames someone else, humanize them. Humanize them. I used to be a chaplain in a maximum security men's prison, and the first day that I went to work was the day when the governor wiped out death row and put all those men who'd been living all by themselves for many years in Illinois back into general population. And I walked with my scared, crazy, white little girl self. I was so scared, honey. I had to walk up and down the row, and pray with those men. And I took their hands, and I looked them in the eye. Because that is my theology, no matter how hard it is. They are not just the case they caught. And my partner believes that too. You know, Jill's an amazing lawyer, but one of the things that she does is she touches her clients. Do you know, honestly, it's like you catch a case and nobody will touch you. She puts her hand on their shoulder. She holds her hand. She looks them in the eye. So we cannot be defined by a single act, no matter how good or how bad we think it is. And when we can hold up the complex truth that we are the other, that we are those people, that we are the broken, when we can realize that everyone is vulnerable to being judged and feeling shame about our experiences. Everyone is vulnerable to being judged and feeling shame about our experiences. When we realize that, then we can let go of who we think we are supposed to be and embrace who we really are. And who we are is all of our experiences. From the day that we first had a heartbeat in our mama's womb, when we were knit together long before we ever graced this planet, until the day that we are no more. So the story's not over. The story is not over. So who are we to decide? Who are we? So, how do we fight shame? Dr. Brown says that the antidote to shame is love and empathy, knowing that we are not alone. It is being vulnerable and connecting with another human being. That is what makes us strong. That helps the most, especially when we are wandering in the desert. That knowing that we are not alone in our brokenness, in our otherness. I want to go back to the desert for a moment. So, person of God, I'm in the way here. Excuse me. I want to go back for a minute to those who are wandering with their burdens bearing down on them, with what seems like stumbling blocks placed at every turn. You see, there's another ancient story. I don't know if you've read all these ancient stories in our Bible, but let me tell you, they're good. They're good and they're relevant. There's another ancient story that says when our ancestors were in the desert on those long wandering journeys, whenever God came close to the people and the people came close to God, our ancestors would build an altar. They would stop and put several rocks on one another and build an altar in order to let the people who come after them know that they are not alone when they are wandering in the desert, because they will see these altars and know someone else has been here. Someone else has been in my shoes, in my place, wandering around in this desert. And so when we're wandering all alone in the desert and we see that we're caught up, stumbling over something here and something there. Let me tell you what my theology says. My theology says that God is everywhere. And so if I had enough chains, there would be an altar every inch. An altar every inch. How could I not? But sometimes it is so hard to see that God is everywhere. When we are in the desert, the wind blows and changes things around. And it makes it very difficult for us to see that God is right in front. She has been right here, now. So what if we just took a moment and realized that maybe the stumbling blocks that we are tripping over are altars? And we surrender to something larger than ourselves. Something bigger than all of us. Maybe it's the people who've come before who have carved a path for you. Maybe it is an unconditional and loving God. But if you have the strength with your community and your God behind you, take off your chain and build an altar. And let the people say, Amen.